There are moments in history that are not marked by explosions, sirens, or the pounding of war drums. They do not arrive with the usual noise of conflict. They come with another kind of sound, deeper, quieter, and far more frightening to those who have lived their whole lives relying on violence. It is silence. One day, that small nation in the heart of the Sahel, once dismissed as the gray zone of the world map, learned how to turn its own silence into a weapon no one could resist. That morning began like any other. The sky over Burkina Faso carried a pale shade of blue. The wind blew red dust from the savannah into the cracks of every rooftop. Children walked to school, the elderly lit their cooking fires, and women carried water home from the wells. No one knew that far away, hundreds of kilometers from their daily routine, decisions were being made that would change the fate of their nation. And no one knew that in the same moment they lowered their heads to tighten a scarf. An army was preparing to move. An army that could not be seen, did not wear boots, did not get tired, and did not need sleep. An army that traveled on silence. That day, the West was still sleeping under the illusion that the world followed the rules they wrote. Intelligence reports from Paris, Washington, and Geneva all repeated the same confident line: Burkina Faso was not ready. They needed 10 more years to build long-range technology, and so emergency meetings, internal warnings, and rising concerns about Sahel's advancing capabilities were pushed aside. No one imagined that only hours later, a convoy of modern, Western-backed military equipment would be wiped out before it could fire a single shot. In an underground room carved deep beneath the earth, red lights flickered across the faces of men and women, tracking every small movement in the southern sky. No one spoke loudly. No one barked orders. No one panicked. And at the center of that room stood the man the world had never truly understood. A man who did not like giving speeches, did not care for bright stages, and never needed long words to convince anyone. He simply stared at the screen, calm eyes, steady, and spoke a single sentence that later marked the beginning of a new era. They will not even have time to start their engines. Not ever again. If there is one thing that makes the world tremble, it is not weapons. Humanity is used to guns, bombs, and massive military contracts. What truly frightens them is when a nation once seen as weak suddenly grows quiet, dangerously quiet. A silence not born from fear, but from preparation. A silence not made to bow down, but to rise, sharp and unshakable. And the man who transformed that silence into power was Ibrahim Traore. This is not just the story of a military operation, not just the story of a convoy destroyed in 14 minutes. This is the story of a nation standing tall for the first time. A story whose opening chapter reveals that the strongest weapon was not metal, fire, or explosives. It was silence. A silence that watched, prepared, and struck at the exact moment it needed to. You are about to enter the journey of that day. The day the world learned that revolutions are not always born from explosions. Sometimes it is silence that reshapes history. And if you want to continue, if you want to hear the full story, don't forget to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. The journey has only just begun. There are people who step into the light through cheers, long speeches, dazzling ceremonies, and waves of applause. But there are also people who rise from the shadows. No noise, no celebration, no fanfare. They move forward with a silence so steady it feels invisible. And then one day, the world suddenly realizes that the quietest one is the person who changed everything. Ibrahim Traore belongs to the second kind. No one dared to say they understood him from the beginning. When he first appeared on national television after the fall of the previous government, the people saw a young face, calm eyes, a low and steady voice. They saw a soldier, but they did not yet see the storm asleep inside him. A storm not meant to destroy, but to sweep away all the years of being led, being dependent, and being underestimated. He was not born into privilege or luxury. Growing up in a nation full of challenges, he knew what it felt like to stand in a land treated as someone else's battlefield. He saw maps drawn from afar, plans written in languages that people did not understand, and decisions made in places where Burkina Faso was nothing more than a small footnote. From those observations, an unshakable belief formed inside him. If you want to change your fate, You must be the one holding the wheel. What makes Traoré remarkable is not simply the aura of a military man. What sets him apart is his ability to stay silent when needed, yet act with lightning speed when the moment comes. He is not the kind of leader who chases praise. He does not step onto stages to tell the world what he intends to do. He just quietly does it. While people were still asking whether Burkina Faso was truly ready for the future he envisioned, deep in underground rooms, he was already building teams of young engineers, signing secret orders, and pushing projects that had no permission to fail. A general once said about him, "When he enters a room, people fall silent by instinct, not out of fear, but because they feel he carries a direction that is unmistakably clear, a certainty that needs no words." And that is how he makes decisions. Fast, without hesitation, without delay, without asking permission. He understands something many generations of African leaders were too afraid to face. To survive, you must cut off dependency. To develop, you must hold the key yourself. But Traoré is not a cold iron leader. People recount that during a closed meeting after an attack on civilians, he stood silently for minutes over the map, then spoke a single short sentence. "No family will ever again bury their child because they refuse to help us." That sentence was not an order, it was a vow. And from that vow, he began a journey no one could predict. A journey that rose from the shadows, not through slogans, but through quiet effort, unseen persistence, and a determination compressed like fire beneath ash. Traoré does not demand blind loyalty. He asks for only two things: precision and truth. Those who cannot offer them simply fall away from his path. Those who remain walk with him, fully aware they are following a man who does not just want to win battles, he wants to put an end to the way the world once treated Burkina Faso. When the country's first UAVs took flight, the world froze, searching for the one who had given the order. And when they found the answer, they understood one thing. The man they thought was silent had never truly been in the dark. He was only waiting for the moment the world would be forced to look him in the eye. This journey will have many turns ahead, but to understand why Burkina Faso has risen, you must first understand the man who led it. Night in Ouagadougou always carried a very particular sound. Not the noise of traffic or the chaos of a large city, but the sound of wind slipping through old tin roofs, creating soft vibrations like the breathing of a land long familiar with scarcity. But at the moment Burkina Faso's silent war began, inside an abandoned-looking warehouse, another sound rose. The sound of heat, of metal, of mines being sharpened, and beneath the dim yellow lights a flame was being lit. The Ouagadougou warehouse had once been nothing more than a storage place for cotton, but under Ibrahim Traore it became the center of one of the boldest technological revolutions in Africa. No signboard, no guards, no press announcement. Just an empty space, a few wooden tables, equipment smuggled in through diplomatic channels, and dozens of people sleeping on a concrete floor every night. They were promised nothing except one sentence: "We will build what they think we cannot." Standing at the center of the room was Dr. Luma Tanari. Her face was always covered with a thin layer of dust, sweat running down her collar, but her eyes never wavered. Luma was not a genius courted by the West. She was the one pushed out of a research council for refusing to sign a foreign aid agreement. They called her stubborn. But Traoré called it dignity. And because of that, their first meeting lasted exactly 4 lines. "What do you want me to build?" "A tool." "For who?" "For us." From that night on, Luma gathered a team of young engineers, most under 30. They came from Bobo Dioulasso, Kaya and Fada, carrying old laptops with swollen batteries and clacking keyboards, but carrying something no foreign aid could ever provide: the belief that their country deserved the right to defend itself without asking anyone for permission. They worked like people who had never learned the meaning of limits. Some nights they stayed awake until 4 in the morning just to rewrite a navigation algorithm. Some nights they burned firewood to stay warm because the generator died midway through. But what made Ouagadougou a legend was not the hardship. It was the moment everything finally worked smoothly. Luma remembered that night vividly. Lights flickered non-stop. The system was out of sync. Signals dropped. A young engineer burst into tears. thinking all their work had been wasted. But just when the team was ready to give up and sleep for a few hours, a 20-year-old stepped forward, voice trembling. "I think the error is in line 243,000. They stared at him, unable to believe it. But 10 minutes of checking proved him right. Not because of luck, but because he read each line of code like reading a story, missing nothing. And then the miracle happened. The screen shifted from red to green, the stability indicator lit up. The prototype UAV in the middle of the warehouse trembled softly, like a bird waking from a long sleep. No one cheered, no one clapped. They simply watched in silence as it lifted a few centimeters off the ground. A sigh drifted through the room, so quiet it blended with the wind. But it was the sigh of people who had been underestimated for far too long. No one outside Ouagadougou knew that that night, a nation had turned a new page. Luma watched the UAV hover in the air, her hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from understanding exactly what this moment meant. She turned to the engineers and whispered, "From now on, no one is allowed to say we need them to survive." That sentence was not a slogan, it was a spark. And in that dusty warehouse, the first flame ignited. The journey of Ouagadougou had only just begun. In the next chapters, you will see how from a single experimental UAV, they created a shockwave that forced the world to look again at the Sahel. The first test night had no fireworks, no cameras, and no speeches to mark a historic milestone. Only the thick black sky of Ouagadougou, the ground cold as stone, and a small group of people standing in the darkness with hearts pounding inside their chests. It was the night the prototype UAV would leave the ground for the first time, a moment they had spent months moving toward, yet no one dared to be certain what would happen once the activation button was pressed. The UAV lay in the center of the dirt yard, its matte black body reflecting the faint yellow glow of the struggling generator humming in the corner. It didn't look like a machine of war. It looked like something asleep. A mechanical being unaware of what it was about to become. No one spoke, no one smiled. Every breath was held back, as if even a single exhale might ruin the entire process. Dr. Luma stood near the left wingtip, gripping the old control board as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She glanced at her team. Young faces, hollow from sleepless nights, clothes stained with oil and burned circuits. They had traded everything for this moment, and if they failed, no one outside Ouagadougou would ever know they had tried. Burkina Faso did not have money to afford mistakes. On this land, every step had to be right the first time. Tegan checked the fuel lines again, breath shaky but hands steady. The youngest member of the team stood several meters away, fingers trembling over the keyboard. He knew that one wrong command could flip the UAV the second it lifted off, but he also knew he was the only one who had read that code hundreds of times. In that tense silence, everyone could hear their own heartbeat. Then the defining moment arrived. Luma took a deep breath and whispered, "Activate the system." No one replied with words. Only the beep of confirmation answered her. On the UAV's body, a row of tiny lights flickered on one by one, like eyes opening for the first time. The processor engaged, the engine spun up with a low whine, just enough for everyone to feel the vibration ripple through the ground. But at the 7th second, the system suddenly threw an error. The lights turned red, the wings shook hard. Metal clashed with a sharp warning note. One engineer exhaled in despair, another pressed his fist to his forehead. Everything seemed to collapse right in front of them. Luma rushed to the console, eyes locked on lines of code flashing wildly. There was no time for fear. If they stopped now, every sleepless month would vanish into nothing. She flipped through her notes, reading so quickly it seemed the letters were burning beneath her fingers. Then a small voice rose from behind her. "Line 244397, it's off by 3 thousandths." Everyone turned to look at the youngest boy. No one believed him, but no one had a better answer either. To West Africa, where Russia continues to deepen its ties, person who hasn't learned how to fear yet. And he was the only one standing steady. Luma ordered the correction, her fingers striking the keys so fast the keyboard became a rush of sharp clicks. A chilling silence followed, and then the lights changed color, from red to orange, then to green. A simple signal, but to them it felt like the first bell of a new era. The UAV slowly lifted its own body, trembling softly, then rose exactly 5 centimeters off the ground. Only 5 centimeters. But 5 centimeters that generations had been waiting for. No applause. No cheering. They simply watched, frozen in place, as if afraid to disturb the fragile miracle before them. It wasn't victory. It was recognition. In metal. In code. In human will. When the UAV settled back down, light as a falling leaf, Luma closed her eyes. Not to rest, but to carve that moment into her heart. The first test night had no outside witnesses, but it was enough to say one thing. Burkina Faso had risen from its own darkness. There are battles the world recognizes as victories, but there are also battles with no names, no flags, no declarations, and no one truly knowing what happened. Only blackened shards of metal left on the road and a silence that stretches for miles. The first UAV strike of Burkina Faso belonged to the second kind. It was more than a military operation. It was a message the world was forced to hear, even though the machines delivering it made no sound at all. That morning, the southern sky of Burkina Faso was crystal clear, with no sign of a coming storm. Herds of goats wandered lazily along the hillsides, and farmers bent over fields still shimmering with dew. Everything Focus to West Africa, where Russia continues to deepen its ties and expand the ECOWAS breakaway states of Burkina Faso and Mali